Now it's time to enjoy Ecosummit London 2014 and have a really great conference. And I thank you so much for being part of it and joining us today and tomorrow. Thank you. All right, now it's time for our first speaker. With a big pleasure, I ask Pedro Miranda of Siemens onto the stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan.
Yeah.
So first of all, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Jan S., for such a kind words for the Crystal. This is where we live and work. And really, my presentation will be a little bit quicker because I have too many things to tell you. But I think it's important always to start with the megatrends and the impacts on a company as global as Siemens. And the last time I talked here last year, we talked about the megatrends. So basically globalization, urbanization, I think those are buzzwords that you all know, but also demographic change and climate change. On top of that, this year we have introduced digital transformation. This is really the new thing on Siemens, that we are bringing the Internet of Things, and also we need to connect more smart information on top of the systems. If you look at our main markets, which are basically electrification, and then you have automation systems, on top you need to have digitalization. That's what makes systems smart. And the market growth for digitalization is almost double digit, between 7 and 9%. So we really see a trend in our businesses that digitalization will be a key element going forward. Digitalization is something that it was not created by Siemens, it's something that everyone knows, connecting more complex things, making them smarter, bringing IT, like Jan S. just mentioned before. And if you take a look, what we expect in every 2 years, the amount of data doubles. So this is amazing. Every 2 years, the amount of data doubles. So this is not a geometrical development, is an exponential development. So that means there are more devices, millions of devices every year on the market. Machines are getting more intelligent, people are getting more intelligent, they are connected, they buy online, they order online, they do all kinds of stuff online. And I think this will be a trend which can be already seen in the apps business. In the apps business, right now we have $72 billion in 2013. So that means that's the amount of trade that is done on apps. If you take a look at 2017, we expect that number to double. That's close to 150 billion euros or dollars on apps, let's say, trade. This is really a trend. So whoever wants to be successful in the future, they have to bring intelligence on products, intelligence on applications. The other part is globalization. Globalization is a buzzword, but for us, large companies, it means that 80% of all the larger multinational companies, 80% of the global trade are done by these companies. So only 20% are left for small traders. So that means globalization in terms of trade is really at the big companies. And this is also a trend which we are very, very attentive, and it will also shape the market going forward. Population growth is something that you know. I've talked about this last year, but this is a slide I've made for this meeting. And if you take a look at the growth of population, the population is basically growing in two areas. It's basically Asia and Africa. So if you go to 2050, basically this is where the growth is. So we have a stagnation on Europe, even a decrease on population, and we have somehow in Latin America and North America an increase. But basically in 2050, that means almost in 40 years, we will have over 2/3 of the population growing basically in Africa and Asia. And this is really the game changer for us. We always think the population growth is in the West, is not, is in Asia. One of the other important topics is that people are living longer. I like the examples from China because they are so dramatic. In 1960, the life expectancy of women and men were around 42, 45 years old. In 50 years, the Chinese managed to have a life expectancy of over 70 years. So we don't have only more people living in Asia, but they are living much longer. And this means that we have to be attentive to this trend. So Medicaid, Medicare, this is really a very impressive information. If you take a look at China, and you take a look at the European countries, you can see on the left part of the graph that the European countries, on average, have an urbanization rate between 68 and 71%. And in China, it's growing 3% compound annual growth rate each year. So about 10 million people are migrating to cities every single year. This is a huge trend. And if you take a look, I'm not going to, let's say, bother you with a lot of details, but we had in 2005 a census of 256 cities, and we have a prognosis for 2025 of over 400 cities. That means a huge trend, not only on the number of cities, but also in megacities, as you see, from 2 to 8 megacities. So a definition of a megacity is it's a city with a population of over 10 million people. And I like to give China as an example because this has an impact on infrastructure. If you take a look at the investments that the Chinese made throughout the years, in the last, let's say, 20 years, they went up not only on the number of cities which have metros, so they went from one metro system, that means connecting people from A to B in 1969 to last year, 87 metro systems. So this is where the growth is. Of course, in the western part of the hemisphere, we have also a lot of growth, but different type of growth. Let's take a look now at urban population, because we think about people migrating to cities, but what does it mean? It showed here that over 46% of the population in the cities has growth 46 each year. That's a huge amount, and this has also to do with the urban land, which is around cities. So we made here an estimation in the last 30 years, or from 2000 to 2030, the amount of urban land which is going to be open for development, be it with buildings or transportation systems or schools or hospitals or clinics or whatever, it's going to double. So that means people are moving to cities, but also the metropolitan area is going very big. It's the case of Berlin, it's the case of London, it's the case of Paris, it's the case of Moscow. Also, the cities is where the money is. This is a slide from McKinsey I like to show. The 22% population, which are based on the city 600 top of the world, they are over 51%, let's say, on the GDP growth. That means 22 people account for over 50% of the wealth of the universe. Now, climate change. Again, climate change has been very well thought about in the last years, but basically, we have increased in the last 200 years less than 1 degree C. So we are not at all at the 2 degree C level. But the prediction from the scientists, and Siemens takes the conservative approach to go with that, we predict a trend up to 2 degrees C by the end of this century, so that by 2100. There is a lot of prognosis on CO2 emissions and the impact of CO2 emissions on the temperature rise around the globe. So we have high growth and low growth. We think that the estimate will be a low growth because a lot of mitigation at the moment with CO2 emissions around the world. And you can see that on the left, on the vertical axis, low growth is a correspondent of 2 degrees C increase. This is where we're going to. I think the world must wake up to this problem because, you know, coastal areas are being flooded. There is the de-icing of the Arctic. And, of course, this will make a very big difference on our lives, especially for the cities which are around the coastal area. Also, in regards to CO2 emissions, I like to show this graph because it gives you really the perception of the grams of CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour produced. And if you use coal, which is still the largest fossil being burned around the world, especially in the East, but also in Europe, you need about 900 grams of CO2 emissions to produce a kilowatt hour. If you compare that with the clean gas, be it shale gas or natural gas, you can half of it. So that means you'll need just over 400 grams. So the impact of CO2 emissions is not something of a scientific, it's really what happens. If you go from coal to gas, you reduce on half the CO2 emissions. And this is where the world goes. We go away from coal and moving on natural gas. Also, if you take a look at the CO2 emissions around the world, and you take the long view, that means the view from many years, and you see the decades on various colors on the graph, you can see that the United States, because of shale gas, is moving from coal to shale. And of course, the amount of increase of CO2 emissions is much smaller than what is happening in China, where there is a huge CO2 emissions, and also in India, because in Europe it's pretty stable. So also it's very important to see where the CO2 emissions are emitted, not only because of population and power consumption, but also on how you produce energy. And of course, CO2 emissions basically come from production of energy. If you take a look again in a deep dive on the CO2 emissions per capita, that means the average CO2 emissions per inhabitant in each country, you see that, of course, the USA is, although reducing dramatically, is still the #1 CO2 emitter in the world, with over 15 metric tons per year, per inhabitant. If you take a look at Germany, it's about 10, and if you take a look at China, it's about 6. Of course, in China, a lot of people live, so the division is, really helping them. But as you take a look at these numbers, you see a lot of efforts going not only on the CO2 emissions total, but also on inhabitant CO2 emissions. There is a lot of talk going around with global energy consumption, because we are consuming less. Actually, we are much more, let's say, keen on reducing consumption per inhabitant, but the world is growing. And this is our prognosis for 2030. The growth will be 1.3 per annum on a global energy consumption. This is in a gigaton oil equivalent. That is what we use in the industry. So it's really amazing that even with all these efforts of reducing consumption, we're still growing 1.3 every single year. And there are global energy consumptions. Energy challenges. Everything is different around the world. So what fits in the UK does not fit usually in Africa or Latin America. And I just have highlighted some of the topics. That means we have in energy, affordable energy in the US and North America because of shale gas. This is a shale gas boom. We have topics on security of energy supply in Latin America, especially in Brazil. But we have many other areas which suffer from different topics. And it's very important to talk about resource efficiency. So that means how you produce and the way you produce is critical going forward. I think this is a good map to give you an overview where the energy topics are. Now coming back to a little bit to what we do here at the Crystal. As you know, we are the center of competence for cities in Siemens. So we conduct research all over the world, and we are based in 70 cities worldwide. And we always like to have this 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. So the world is moving from the 1 to 2. If you take a look what we do at the city 1.0 or the infrastructure 1.0, we have electric railways, we have modern buildings, and we have power grids which are very simple. This is where the world is. And we are moving in some areas to 2.0. This is also an important, let's say, definition how we see technology going forward. We have more intelligent infrastructure. For example, the DLR in London is driverless. You don't have drivers there. Also in Paris, in Line 5. We have smart grids managing many different loads. That means with renewables, be it hydro or solar or wind. This is very important. And when we are in a shape to really bring digitalization on top, then you're talking about 3.0. So all the cities in the world are either 1, 2, or 2.5, let's say. We don't have a city with 3.0, but this is where the world is going. And cities are really, let's say, a center of action because of all the topics I've told you. More people live in cities, more money is in cities. But we have to take a look at which technologies, which smart technologies really do we use in cities. And we at Siemens are a technical company like you guys in the startups, and we like to pinpoint systems and the interconnectivity of systems. So first of all, you have to have a very good product. You have to make those products talk with them, between each other, and this is a system. And then you have to put systems talking in an overall, let's say, program. And this is what we have for the automation in the transportation network. So we work on very specific products for these applications, a lot of software embedded, so products with software embedded. And then we try to connect that in systems and bigger programs. These are examples. For example, e-ticketing. It's a major driver for transportation. People want to pay electronically. They don't want to have tickets, so the ticket has to be used in many different modes, and this is a trend. We have also a lot of sensors coming into traffic because traffic is getting very difficult to manage. Another example is the power grid. We work on very specific products for power grid that makes making it much more intelligent to connect how the consumption and distribution is made. And you can see a lot of examples here, like in energy storage, but also power monitoring. These are just examples of products that we are currently in our portfolio, putting a lot of money to make them smart. The other topic is energy consumption on buildings. You know, buildings are smart only if you make them very effective. That means if the cost of ownership throughout the years comes below a normal standard building, then you are a successful businessman like us. So it's very important that we bring that data, and buildings, believe me, in this building, we know everything that is going on. Each light, it's on, when is the air conditioning on, when we should turn around the windows, everything. So it's very easy for an engineer to look at the main picture and start to do that. Again, intelligent infrastructure in security. This is something in London, for example, is very important. I think there's over 300,000 cameras spread throughout the city for surveillance, for security, for managing crowds. And last but not least, I like to talk about the energy revolution. The energy revolution is basically introducing the renewables, the green and smart way of doing consumption and production at the prosumers level. And this shows exactly how can you connect those different modes of production and consumption, be it with bidirectional information, that means you need smart data, but also one way. That means there are sources of energy which are one way, and there are consumption and production which are two ways. And this is really the smart grid of the future. We have worked on this project for many, many years. We are now one of the leaders which can give a platform with product systems and solutions which is integrated in the new age of electricity. Connecting smart buildings, smart grid, this is something that everyone is trying to do. The one that gets there first will have a lion's share of the market. And again, smart cities. So smart cities is where we go from a central generation to a decentralized generation. That's the stage right now. And then the smartness of the system is really bringing the data into play. Last but not least, and that's my final slide, we should all build for a lasting world. That means if you build products which are not at the level of resilience, you cannot be successful. We have seen that many, many years, that if you don't make a preparation for events, be it in cities, be it in industry, be it in commerce, if you don't endure with a robust design and you don't recover from an event, it's very difficult to be successful. So that's my last sentence here. Build to last, build sustainable, and you will be successful. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Ken.
We take a question from the audience.
I take all the questions.
We have a little bit more light during Q&A time. Who has a question? Please raise your hand and wait for the microphone runner to find you. Siegwald.
Thank you very much for. You mentioned the microgrids, and I saw a lot of solar on the rooftops. I also saw small wind turbines in a corner. So I wonder, what do you how do you see the role of small-scale wind in the future?
I see it as part of the global equation to make it more sustainable in terms of the nanogrid or the microgrid. That means if we only do centralized production, transmission, and distribution, and we do not allow on a successful rate to have the prosumers using whatever they want, we are going very badly in that sense. That means we need to allow the consumers to produce at smaller scale because of the reason that then the system is more resilient. So if you have a huge issue in transmission, you can always produce locally. And also, it makes sense because it's more efficient. That means you are closer to the user, to the consumer, so you can control better what to use and not to use. So I would say there is space for everyone. There is space for everyone, but believe me, the systems have to be bankable. So the business case has to exist. So sometimes in the past, when we didn't have grid parity with wind or with solar, it was very difficult to convince people because there was no return on investment. So the more the grid parity is close to the main distributors of energy, the more chances you have to have localized, let's say, production. And this is a topic also of regulation. If everyone starts to make windmills in their gardens, it's going to be not really nice. So it's very important for the local communities to decide what they want and what they do not want, because the landscape is also important. So I think the communities play here, for your case, a very important case on regulation, but also on the grid parity. You cannot sell systems if they are not, let's say, if they don't have a foreseeable return on investment, even if it's 10 years. But you have to have a foreseen return on investment.
All right, we have one more question from the audience, maybe? Volunteers? Ben?
Yes, sir.
Wait for the microphone.
Ben Lynch, Cleantech Capital Advisors. Probably an unfair question, but I'll ask it anyway. If we look the last few years, Siemens has kind of got out of the water business, which we kind of might see as a future theme for smart cities, solar, areas like that. At the same time, you bid on the gas turbine business of Alstom. You're now trying to acquire Dresser-Rand. How do you kind of explain these kind of big bets in the traditional energy sector versus kind of retrenchment, it would seem, in the kind of future energy themes? Thank you.
That's a very good question, but I'm in the silent period. As you know, the fourth quarter figures are going to be announced in a couple of days, so I cannot comment on acquisition moves. But what I can tell you is the following. Large companies have a lot of ideas, and they have also a portfolio management, let's say, strategy. So whenever we sell or buy businesses, it's because of our portfolio management strategy. So it does not have to make sense, let's say, every single time, but in the overall strategy, it makes a lot of sense for the company. It could be a regrouping, it could be a focusing on a new market, and big companies are now getting much more flexible in making acquisitions and divestments. It's not something that you should have a business for the next 50 years. So you have to play with your portfolio, and in that sense, all the acquisitions that we made, let's say, or announced in the last, let's say, year, are going directly in this portfolio management, let's say, strategy. Sorry, I cannot give you more details on that company. It's stock market regulations.
Yeah. All right, Pedro, thank you so much for the opening.
And I wish everyone a very good stay at the Crystal.
We take a photo here
on
stage with a...
Thank you.
Okay.
I would like just to say that I put this slide here.
Yeah.
You were watching why the United States there. You know, this was in 2003, in April 14, when it was the huge blackout.
Yeah. 50 million people.
Yes, 50 million people had no energy. And this is what happens if you don't take care of the long term, of the resilience system. So make sure your products, and make sure your systems and your, let's say, networks do not create that for our customers.
Yeah, and this is why we are in Europe, and we like all you guys, European guys, who are really sustainable, and
that's right.
And we don't have so many blackouts.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.